I'd been struggling to find work lately, so stumbling across this job felt like a stroke of luck. The job posting was simple. Drive a delivery truck from the city to a small town 3 hours away. The pay was good, and I needed the money. The route was supposed to be easy. Take the main highway, no detours, just follow the directions. The delivery company was small, run by a man named Richard. He seemed a bit off. Not rude, not strange, just quiet. He barely spoke to me, and when he handed me the keys, he just nodded and said, "Stay on the highway, and don't stop for anyone, no matter what." It was an odd warning, but I brushed it off. I'd be driving at night, so it made sense to avoid distractions. The first hour was uneventful. The highway stretched out in front of me, empty and dark, the headlights cutting through the foggy air. The road was desolate, no other cars in sight, just miles and miles of nothing but trees and the occasional sign. Around midnight, I noticed something in the distance. A figure standing on the side of the road, just at the edge of my headlights. They were facing away from me, staring into the trees, completely still. I slowed down, instinctively, squinting to get a better look. The figure wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. I couldn't see their face, but something about them felt wrong, like they didn't belong there. Remembering Richard's warning, I sped up, passing the figure without looking back. I kept my eyes on the road, my grip tight on the wheel, heart pounding. It was probably just a hitchhiker, I told myself. But deep down, I knew something was off. An hour later, I saw them again. Same figure, same coat, same hat, standing in the exact same position, facing away, as if they'd never moved. A cold chill crept down my spine. I was sure I hadn't taken a wrong turn. I'd been on the highway the whole time. I drove past them, refusing to look directly, and kept going. But the road felt different now. The trees seemed darker, the air thicker. I could feel the silence pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I kept driving, trying to shake off the feeling, but every mile only made it worse. The road stretched endlessly ahead, like it was pulling me in, and no matter how far I drove, I felt like I wasn't getting any closer to my destination. Then, as I rounded a bend, I saw the figure again. This time, they stood right in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop, just a few feet in front of them. My heart was racing, my hands shaking as I stared at the figure. They slowly turned to face me. Their face was empty. Hollow eyes, an expression that was almost human but not quite. And that's when I noticed they were smiling. Not a warm smile, not a friendly one. This was something else, a twisted, mocking grin that seemed to stretch wider and wider, as if it would split their face in two. I felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to breathe. The figure just stood there watching me, that smile never faltering. Slowly, they raised a hand, pointing directly at me. In a surge of panic, I threw the truck into reverse, my hands trembling as I spun the wheel and turned the truck around. Gravel scattered beneath the tires as I floored the accelerator, racing back the way I'd come. My heart pounded, and I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I drove, I glanced in the mirror, and there they were, the figure. They stood in the middle of the road watching me, their head tilting ever so slightly, as if amused by my attempt to escape. But I didn't slow down. I pushed the truck harder, watching as they grew smaller and smaller in the distance until they were nothing but a shadow. I kept driving, refusing to look back again. The road, once twisted and endless, began to look familiar. The trees grew sparse, the night less dense, and just when I thought I might make it out, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. There was a message from an unknown number. Hands shaking, I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. turn back or stay with me forever. Ignoring the message, I sped up, watching the first hints of dawn on the horizon. When I finally reached the city, I pulled over, heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that they were still watching, waiting for me to return to that cursed road. I quit the job the next day, leaving the truck keys on the counter without a word. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can still see them, standing in the middle of that dark road, waiting. And some nights, I swear, I hear the faint sound of my phone buzzing, a reminder that the road is still there, calling me back. It was late, well past midnight, and I was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. I couldn't sleep, and the silence in my apartment felt unusually heavy. Every creak of the building seemed louder than usual, the shadows in the corners somehow darker. Just as I was about to put my phone down, a message popped up on my screen. It was from my best friend Mark. "Hey, you still up?" It wasn't strange for Mark to message me at odd hours. He and I had been friends since childhood, and we both had a habit of texting each other whenever something was on our minds. I replied, "Yeah, can't sleep. What's up?" A few seconds later, he responded, "I need you to come over." I glanced at the time, 2:03 a.m. It was unusual, but I figured he probably just wanted to talk. Mark had been going through a rough time recently, and maybe he just needed some company. I didn't mind. After all, he'd been there for me during my own late-night crises. "Sure, be there in 10, I typed, and got out of bed, grabbing my keys and jacket. The streets were empty, lit by the soft glow of streetlights as I drove to his apartment. The whole city felt quiet, almost too quiet, like it was holding its breath. When I pulled up to Mark's building, I noticed that all the lights in his apartment were off. Strange. I sent him a quick message. "I'm here. Are you awake?" A few seconds later, I got a reply. "Doors open." I made my way up the stairs, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty hallway. The door to Mark's apartment was slightly ajar, just as he'd said. I pushed it open and stepped inside, feeling the chill of the dark, empty space. "Mark?" I called out softly. No answer. I took a few steps into the living room. It was completely dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside, casting long shadows across the floor. I felt my way around, finally flipping on a light switch. The apartment looked empty, almost untouched. There were no signs that anyone was even home. I checked my phone, and another message from Mark appeared. "Come to my room." A chill ran down my spine. Something felt off, but I brushed it off, telling myself he probably just didn't want to wake anyone in the building by speaking out loud. I walked down the hall to his bedroom door, hesitating for a moment, before I knocked lightly. "Mark?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Again, no answer. Slowly, I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. The room was pitch black, but I could make out a figure sitting on the edge of the bed facing away from me. Relieved, I sighed. "Mark, you scared me. Why didn't you answer?" He didn't respond, didn't move. He just sat there, perfectly still. A sense of unease washed over me, and I took a cautious step forward. "Mark?" I reached out to touch his shoulder, but the moment my hand made contact, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Mark. "Where are you? I'm almost at your place." I froze, staring at the screen, feeling the blood drain from my face. "What?" I typed, my hands shaking. "I'm at your apartment. You told me to come over." 3 dots appeared as he typed, and his response came through. "I haven't been home all night. I was heading to yours because I thought you needed me." My breath caught in my throat, and I slowly looked back at the figure on the bed. My heart raced, my skin prickling with cold dread. "Mark?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure on the bed shifted, its head turning slowly toward me. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw it clearly. A face that wasn't Mark's. Pale, hollow eyes, and a smile that twisted unnaturally wide, as if it was stretching the skin itself. I stumbled back, my mind racing, and bolted out of the room, heart pounding as I sprinted down the hall and out of the apartment. I didn't stop running until I was back in my car, slamming the door and locking it, my breaths coming in shallow, panicked gasps. I looked back up at the apartment window and saw the figure standing there, watching me. Its face, still smiling, that twisted, horrific smile, its eyes following me, unblinking, as I backed out and sped down the road. Mark arrived at my apartment half an hour later, finding me still shaken, unable to explain what I'd seen. But when we went back to his apartment the next day, everything was as he'd left it. No sign of anyone, no trace of the figure. But I can't shake the feeling that, whatever it was, it's still out there, watching, waiting for me to return. And sometimes, late at night, I can still picture that face, staring back at me from the window, its twisted smile burned into my memory. I never went back to that apartment, but I can't shake the feeling that someday it might come looking for me. I'd been going through my grandmother's old things, clearing out her attic after she passed. She'd been the kind of person who kept everything, family trinkets, old letters, photographs, and I figured most of it would be sentimental. As I sorted through dusty boxes and stacks of yellowed paper, I came across an old photo album. The cover was cracked and worn, and as I opened it, a faint scent of lavender filled the air. The pages were filled with black and white photos of family members, most of whom I barely recognized, their faces frozen in stiff smiles from another time. Then, halfway through the album, I found a photograph that seemed wrong. It was a picture of a young boy, maybe about 10 years old, standing in front of my grandmother's house. He had a blank, almost eerie look on his face, his eyes too wide, too dark, staring straight into the camera. I didn't recognize him, and something about the image made me uncomfortable. As I flipped the photo over, I saw a date written in pencil, August 17th, 1963. Curious, I kept looking through the album, but there were no other pictures of the boy. Every other photo was of family gatherings, holiday dinners, and birthday parties. The boy's photo felt out of place, like it didn't belong. I asked my mom about it later, but she didn't recognize him either. She said my grandmother never mentioned a boy like that and suggested it was probably a neighbor kid or a friend from school. Still, something about that photograph lingered in my mind, and later that night, I pulled it out again. The boy's face looked strange. It wasn't just blank. It was almost as if he was looking through the photo, directly at me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing his eyes every time I closed my own, feeling his gaze like a weight pressing down on me. The next morning, I noticed something strange. The photo was lying on my bedside table, even though I was certain I'd left it in the album the night before. Shaking it off as my own forgetfulness, I returned it to the album. But as the day went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I'd see a figure standing just behind me. Over the next few days, things only got stranger. Every night, I'd place the photo back in the album, only to find it on my bedside table again in the morning. I started hearing faint whispers in the night, like someone softly calling my name from far away. The air felt heavy, charged with a presence I couldn't explain. And then, one night, I woke up to find the photo lying on my chest. the boy's eyes staring straight into mine. My heart raced as I bolted upright, clutching the picture in my trembling hands. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew that whatever was attached to this photo was far from friendly. Desperate, I took the photo and buried it in a box, hiding it in the attic under piles of old books and linens. I told myself it was over, that I'd put the boy out of sight and out of mind. But that night, I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. Soft, slow footsteps, like someone was pacing, waiting. My breath caught as the door creaked open just an inch. The hallway beyond was dark, shadows dancing across the walls. I held my breath, frozen in place, as a faint, familiar whisper filled the air. I'm waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, listening to those whispered words, but eventually the footsteps faded, and I was left alone in silence. The next morning, I went up to the attic to check on the box, half convinced I'd find the photo missing. But when I opened it, the picture was still there, buried under layers of old things. Relieved, I closed the box and walked away, hoping I'd finally put the whole ordeal behind me. But later that day, as I was leaving the house, I glanced at the hallway mirror and stopped cold. There, reflected behind me, was the boy. His face was pale, eyes wide, his mouth twisted in a grim smile as he looked back at me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I haven't seen him since. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I catch glimpses of him in reflections, shop windows, rearview mirrors, even the glossy surface of my phone screen. He's always there, just behind me, waiting. And now, I'm starting to wonder if he'll ever leave. I'd always loved hiking, being out in nature surrounded by the sounds and scents of the forest. There was something peaceful about it, an escape from the noise of everyday life. That's why, when I found a trail that was supposedly untouched by most hikers, I couldn't resist. The trail wasn't marked on any official map. I'd only heard about it from a friend who warned me it was easy to get lost. But I liked the idea of being in a place few had been before. So, on a chilly autumn morning, I packed a small bag and headed out, eager to see this hidden forest. The entrance to the trail was barely visible, just a narrow gap between two trees. As I stepped inside, it was like crossing into another world. The trees were taller, their leaves thicker, casting shadows that danced across the ground. The air was still, unusually so, and I noticed there was no birdsong, no rustling of animals, just silence. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the quiet became. Every step I took echoed slightly, as if the forest was amplifying the sound. After about an hour, I stopped to catch my breath, feeling a strange heaviness settle over me. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, carried on the wind. I turned, looking around, but saw nothing, just the trees, standing tall and silent. I shook it off, telling myself it was my mind playing tricks in the silence. But as I continued down the trail, the whispering returned, growing louder, more insistent. It sounded like a voice, murmuring something just out of reach. I strained to hear, but the words were indistinct, almost like they were being spoken in another language. After another mile, I came across something odd, a single wooden sign, old and faded, nailed to a tree. The letters were barely legible, but I managed to make out the word, turn. A chill ran down my spine. Turn. Where? Turn back? Or turn off the trail? I decided to keep moving forward. I'd come too far to turn back, and my curiosity was stronger than my fear. But with each step, the whispers grew louder, more intense, like dozens of voices blending together. They were coming from the trees, from the ground, from the shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. Then I saw it. A small, weathered cabin nestled among the trees. It looked abandoned, the wood warped and rotting, the windows cracked and clouded with dirt. The door was slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer. There was something strange about the cabin, an unnatural stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. As I approached the door, I felt the whispers grow louder, almost deafening now. I pushed the door open, peering inside. The cabin was empty except for a single chair in the center of the room, and on that chair was a journal. I walked inside, feeling the air grow colder as I stepped over the threshold. The journal was old, its cover worn and faded, with the name Isaac scrawled across it. I picked it up, the pages yellowed and fragile. The entries were short and hurried, as if written by someone in a state of panic. Day 1. I've found the cabin. The whispers are louder here. They follow me. Day 3. I can't leave. Every time I try, the trail just brings me back. Day 6. I'm not alone. I see them now. The shadows. They watch me from the trees. The entries became more frantic, scribbled words crossing each other out, as if the writer was struggling to keep his sanity. Day 10. They want me to stay. They need me to stay. Day 12. If anyone reads this, don't follow the whispers. Don't come here. Turn back. The last entry was a single line, scrawled across the page in a shaky hand. They are here. I dropped the journal, my heart pounding as the air grew even colder. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, I heard it. A faint voice, coming from just outside the cabin. Isaac. The voice was soft, gentle, almost familiar, but filled with an eerie echo. I backed away from the door, my mind racing, and then I saw them. The shadows. They moved slowly, drifting among the trees, dark figures without faces, gliding soundlessly toward the cabin. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, desperately searching for another way out, but the windows were covered with grime, and there was no other door. The shadows drew closer, gathering just outside, watching me through the doorway. Their presence was suffocating, filling the air with a weight that pressed down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then one of them stepped inside. Its form was vague, shifting, like smoke taking shape, but I could feel its gaze on me. It extended a hand, pointing directly at me. "Stay," it whispered. I turned, grabbing the journal and clutching it to my chest as I bolted for the back of the cabin. I hit the wall hard, fumbling to find an escape, but the walls felt endless, like I was trapped in some shifting nightmare. "Isaac," another voice called, echoing through the cabin. I screamed, spinning around to find the room empty once again. The shadows had vanished, but the silence was worse. The weight of it pressed down on me, freezing me in place. I looked down at the journal in my hands, only to see my own name scrawled on the cover in my handwriting. I dropped it, backing away, but the shadows returned, surrounding me, whispering, "Stay, stay with us." My vision blurred, my thoughts growing foggy as I felt myself slipping, fading into the darkness. I stumbled to the door, but the world outside was different now, distorted, like a twisted reflection of the forest. The last thing I remember is the whispering, blending together in a haunting rhythmic chant as the shadows closed in, pulling me deeper into the dark. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks, years maybe. Time doesn't work the same in this place, but sometimes, when the air grows still, I hear footsteps outside the cabin. A new hiker, another lost soul, drawn by the whispers. And I am waiting too. When I moved into my new apartment, I was thrilled. It was close to work, affordable, and had this beautiful view of the city skyline. Everything was perfect, at first. But now, looking back, I almost wish I'd never moved in. It started about 3 weeks after I settled in. Late one night, around midnight, my phone rang. It was one of those old rotary phones that had come with the apartment. A retro touch I thought was quirky at first. But when the ringing started, echoing through my tiny apartment, it felt out of place. I got up, groggy and disoriented, and picked up the receiver. Hello? Silence. I frowned, assuming it was a wrong number. I waited for someone to say something, but there was nothing, just a faint, crackling static. I hung up, shaking off the strange feeling, and went back to bed. The next night, the phone rang again. Same time, same eerie silence on the other end. I asked, "Who is this?" Louder this time, but no response. Just that faint static. A chill crawled down my spine as I hung up. This went on for several nights. The phone would ring at midnight, and when I answered, there was no one there. Each night, I tried asking different things. Who are you? What do you want? But the silence remained. One night, feeling particularly unnerved, I decided to unplug the phone. I figured it was just some prank caller, or maybe a glitch with the old lines in the building. But at midnight, it rang again. The phone sat there, unplugged from the wall, ringing loudly in the silent room. My heart started pounding. I couldn't make sense of it. It was impossible. But there it was. With a trembling hand, I picked it up. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper. For a moment, silence, but then finally a faint sound. Breathing. Soft, steady, like someone was on the other end, waiting. I swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of fear and anger rise up. Who is this? Why are you calling me? The breathing stopped. And then, in a voice so faint I could barely hear it, someone whispered, "I'm waiting for you." I slammed the phone down, heart racing. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The next morning, I called the phone company, but they said they hadn't detected any incoming calls on my line at that time. They suggested it might be a crossed line or an issue with the old wiring. I wanted to believe them. But something about that whisper haunted me. Over the next few days, I started noticing other strange things. Small things at first, items slightly out of place, the faint smell of something musty and old in my apartment. I brushed it off as paranoia, telling myself it was all in my head. Then, one night, I was watching TV when I noticed something on the screen. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I stared, it became clearer. There was a shadow, a figure, barely visible, standing just behind me. My heart stopped. I turned around, but there was no one there. The room was empty, silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The phone calls continued. Every night, right at midnight, it would ring. And each night, the voice grew louder, more insistent. I started losing sleep, dreading that nightly call. I tried leaving the apartment, spending the night at a friend's place, but each time, I'd come back to find my phone ringing, as if it knew I'd returned. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I wasn't going to let this, whatever it was, control me. So I waited by the phone, watching the clock tick closer to midnight. At exactly 12, it rang. I picked it up immediately, not giving it a chance to haunt me with that silence. "Listen, I don't know who you are or what you want, but this has to stop." My voice was shaking, but I forced myself to sound firm. Silence. And then, that whisper. "I'm right here." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Slowly, I looked around the room. It felt like someone was right behind me. I could feel a cold breath on my neck, hear the faintest rustling, like someone shifting their weight. I closed my eyes, heart pounding. "Who are you?" I whispered. "I've always been here," the voice replied. And then, almost playfully, "You invited me in." The line went dead. I dropped the phone, backing away from it, my mind racing. None of it made sense. I hadn't invited anyone in. I lived alone. I was careful, wasn't I? That night, I barely slept. I lay there, listening to the silence, waiting for the sound of footsteps or whispers. Every creak of the building, every shift in the shadows felt like someone lurking, just out of sight. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences only grew. Objects would move on their own. My keys, my shoes, a glass left on the table. I'd leave the room, and when I came back, they'd be somewhere else. The smell grew stronger, a sickly, musty odor that clung to the air. And then, one night I heard something new. A voice, humming softly, coming from my bedroom. I approached slowly, my hands shaking as I pushed open the door. The room was dark, empty, but the humming continued, faint and melodic, echoing around me. I stood there, frozen, as the humming grew louder, filling my head. I felt dizzy, disoriented, and then I heard it, clear as day. "I'm in your bed." My blood ran cold. I looked at the bed, but it was empty. Still, the voice continued, low and mocking. "I'm waiting, just for you." I ran out of the apartment that night, not bothering to pack. I didn't care. I just wanted to be gone, to leave that thing, whatever it was, behind. I moved in with a friend, thinking I'd finally escaped. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that it's still waiting, that it followed me. That one night, I'll wake up to the sound of my phone ringing, and I'll hear that voice whispering, calling me back to that place. Or worse, that I'll find it lying beside me, waiting in silence. I haven't touched another phone since, but every night, I still hear it. That faint, ghostly ringing echoed in my mind, reminding me that some doors, once opened, can never be closed.